So this is an honors student debate. So all these students up here are in the honors program. So they're doing full-time classes. They have to keep really high GPAs. They have all these extracurricular projects to do. So they are fully sleep deprived and struggle to take on a pretty complex subject in a very short amount of time. As you're going to find out, this subject can get very legal and difficult. So I just kind of want to extend my gratitude to these really fine young students who have put in a heck of a lot of time, late nights, early mornings, weekends, to try to prepare for this. So I'd like to give it up for these guys before we do anything else. Okay, so the purpose of debates. I also teach argumentation and debate, which is very akin to philosophy, sort of. And it's the design of debates for public debate is to try to raise awareness and to try to broaden your perspectives on socially significant issues that are timely and controversial. So that's what this is supposed to be about. It's supposed to serve a public good. The value is to try to see that other people actually have valid points even when you're pretty convinced of your own ideas. Debate makes you really have to think about the other sides of an issue. So with that said, these fine debaters here today were assigned their positions. If they do their job well, they're going to fool you into believing they actually believe what they're saying, which they may or they may not, because in debate, I don't ask them. I've never asked them what their opinion is, and honestly, for right now, I don't care, because their purpose is not to do anything except represent their side, kind of like a defense lawyer. You just get your client and you say, go defend them. So they were just assigned their side. So please, don't come up to them on campus, oh, you're the anti-union guy, or whatever. Wait, they may not even believe what they're saying necessarily on a personal level. So our debate today is about the question of whether the US should keep or eliminate tenure. So a lot of people kind of wonder, well, what is tenure? So let's take a look. Let's take a look. I know I have to kind of stick to this mic here, but in 1940, the American Association of University Professors kind of finalized what they had been working on for decades. This has been going on for over a century, this issue of teacher employment contracts. And they kind of finalized a statement of principles on academic freedom and tenure. So I kind of want to just look at this statement and kind of explain what it means. So it says here, and I quote, after the expiration of a probationary period, teachers or investigators should have permanent or continuous tenure, and their service should be terminated only for adequate cause, except in the case of retirement for age or under extraordinary circumstances because of financial exigencies, which means like if a program no longer is funded and there's just nowhere to put you, so, or serious budget cuts or something like that. So basically, what is that really saying? You have to interpret that. And that's been interpreted in different ways, and we're going to talk about that in the debate. But for our purposes, another way to look at it is, it provides teachers, it's an employment contract that provides teachers who have demonstrated their competence after a probationary period, a system of due process rights before they're terminated. Now you think, don't we all have due process rights before termination? No. There are at-will employees, there are contingent employees who can go contract by contract and just not be rehired. So no, you don't actually have to be fired for good cause in every single employment contract. So lately meaning over the last few decades, but more recently over the last couple decades, there's been a huge kind of a movement against tenure across the entire country. And it's part of a larger movement. It's sort of, maybe you guys have seen that even with the current administration and a kind of a movement toward to the right, sort of anti-labor. Maybe you're familiar with some of the anti-labor movements, anti-union movements, things like that. So this is part of a larger movement against unions in general. So you see things like these major headline articles, Time, Newsweek, many places. You know, we have to fire bad teachers. We can't get rid of the bad teachers because of tenure. You know, rotten apples. It's nearly impossible to fire a bad teacher. So people are very upset about this. And that's part of the argument, I guess, against tenure, which we'll hear about today as well. So I'm going to kind of preview the general arguments, and then afterward we'll have a discussion in Q&A where we can tease out some of the specifics. So the people today, the debaters, are just here to give you the philosophical general points. If you're looking for a lot of highly specific evidence, because I know in my Comp 20 we demand that, you're not going to get as much of that because of time constraints. There's a lot of arguments to cover. So if you want that, we'll flesh that out more in the Q&A. So the pro side is going to be arguing, that's the affirmative, is going to be arguing that tenure is a good thing and that we should keep it for a variety of reasons. The most important would be under something called academic freedom. You need to have job security and freedom to be able to stand up against power structures. So if I want to challenge administration or prevailing political viewpoints or whatever it is, I've got to have academic freedom to do it and security that I won't get fired. So that's the basic argument. It would increase the quality of education, so they'll explain that to you. It would be more economically efficient to keep tenure than to lose it. And it's actually not some special privilege, it's an earned and justifiable reward for hard work and service. On the other side, they're going to say that no, academic freedom, not so much. It's more academic immunity. In other words, you're immune to being fired. So it basically protects bad teachers from appropriate termination. And the protection that is being offered by tenure is no longer needed because of new laws and new protections that we've had since tenure was first adopted. Then they're going to get into how it could actually decrease the quality of education, and it's economically inefficient as well. And then finally, it's actually not fair. It creates a kind of a privileged class of people. Like, why should teachers get this special privilege of lifetime security when we all have to earn ours? So that's kind of the whole argument in a nutshell. So our debaters are going to address these issues, and then we're going to talk about more issues than that when we get to the Q&A. So for right now, to moderate this event, one of our 5 honors students is going to come up and act as your guide through the rest of this, and I'll try to pop in if needed, if I have to, but otherwise I think they'll be able to handle the rest of the debate here. So I'm going to introduce you now to Mr. Nia Quang, who will now be your moderator.
Good evening, everyone. Oops. Thank you, everyone, for being here. I also want to give a special thanks to Mr. Steve Lippman, as well as our counselor, Yolanda Coleman, and the Student Honors Program for making this honor debate possible today. So, 4 debaters, 2 against 2. The affirmative against the opposition on the motion, should we keep tenure or not? The affirmative will stand for the motion to keep tenure, and the opposition will want to eliminate tenure. Okay, let me introduce you guys to our debaters. On the affirmative side, we have Michael Trin and Cynthia Mack. And on the opposition side, we have Ellie Nguyen and Juliet Davila, I'm sorry. So the debate will follow the process: affirmative, opposition, opposition, affirmative. Each speaker will have 7 to 8 minutes to present their arguments. And during their speech, the other side can stand up, raise their hand, and can ask up to 3 brief questions. Anytime during the speaker's speech, besides the first and last minutes. And the speakers must accept 3 questions. So at the end of the speech, there will be, as Mr. Steve has mentioned, there will be index card for you to write your question anonymously, and you can give it either to me or Mr. Steve, and our debater can answer those questions. And the sign-in sheet for extra credit will be available during the Q&A session. I also want to mention that positive feedback is allowed, meaning that when you hear a good argument or something nice that's kind of startle you, you can knock on the board like on the hard, solid surface to show that you like that argument.
Okay, so let's do an example because I'm not sure they understood that. So you have notebooks in front of you. You have some sort of solid surface to make a sound on, right? Okay, just anything. Yeah, there you go. So if one of the speakers says something that you think was, it doesn't have to be something you agree with. You just think they said it well, or it was just a well-stated argument. So you can be sportsmanlike. I mean, they can clap for those people, and the other side can clap for them. It's okay. So let's try it out. So let's say I'm arguing and I say, I think that it would be imperative that all finals be canceled and everyone be given full credit for their finals. Nice. All right, so you got the, and if you really want to add a little extra, not too loud, but you just do one of these. Hear, hear. It's a little nod to British Parliament in the old days we did. We go, oh, hear, hear. So anyway, if you want to add a little extra flair to it, you can. You really like it, you just, hear, hear, okay? So don't do that at any time they're speaking, okay? It gives them feedback, lets them know that they're doing something that you like.
Okay. So let's start the debate. Our first speakers on the affirmative side will be Michael Trin. Please give a round of applause for him.
Your campaign had an ad showing migrants climbing over walls and so on. But they weren't actors. They're not going to be doing that.
They weren't actors. Well, no, it's true. Do you think they were actors? They weren't actors. They didn't come from Hollywood. These were people. This was an actual. It happened a few days ago, and
they're hundreds of miles away. Though they're hundreds and hundreds of miles away. That's not an invasion.
Honestly, I think you should let me run the country. You run CNN, and if you did it well, your ratings.
Let me ask you. If I may ask one other question, Mr. President. If I may ask one other question, are you worried about?
That's enough. That's enough.
Mr. President,
that's enough.
And ask one of the other folks.
That's enough.
Pardon me, ma'am. Mr. President.
That's enough.
Mr. President, one of the questions, if I may ask, on the Russia investigation, are you concerned that you may have?
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian investigation because it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Mr. President, are you worried about indictments coming down in this investigation? Mr. President.
I'll tell you what, CNN should be ashamed of itself having you working for them. You are a rude, terrible person. You shouldn't be working for CNN. Go ahead.
Now, this was Jim Acosta, a news reporter who was banned by Trump from the White House because, I quote, he asked difficult and inappropriate questions. Now, I believe his questioning was very appropriate because the role of the media is to be the watchdog for the government, to keep them in check. Their job is to report the truth, and to do so, they need some sort of political protection. And like reporters, professors also need this political protection. So I'm here on the affirmative side for the motion of keeping tenure with some minor improvements. So I'm Michael, and I'd like to say thank you to my partner, the affirmative, Mr. Steve, Yolanda Coleman, and the honors program for coming, and you guys for coming here today. Now, tenure protects professors from arbitrary firings, leads to higher qualities of education, helps professors advocate for their students, and prevents schools from firing expensive professors for less expensive and less experienced ones. Now, tenure protects professors from arbitrary firings, and these arbitrary firings can be either political, personal, or research-based. Now, tying back to my introduction, professors need that political protection to report the truth of their research, and they cannot do so if they're at risk for losing their positions and losing research funding due to their research. Now, an example of this would be Mark Edwards, a tenured professor at Virginia Tech, where he discovered high levels of lead in the Washington, D.C. water supply, and he spent many years researching and proving that the misconduct of the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, and the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And these are federal agencies, and the government does not want to be held accountable for their mistakes. So what they did was they threatened to withhold all the research funding from Virginia Tech. However, this could have been much worse. I'll take your question.
Okay, so I heard what you say. Okay, according to what you said, what he's investigating can be considered as illegal. And that's actually a protective activity, so that professor shouldn't have been feared for losing his job. So because there are some sections about protective activities that employees can do. So that's one of those. So like reporting or researching, participating in an investigation of an illegal or possibly illegal activity.
My thing is that he was never really, the backlash wasn't on him. Because of his research, that doesn't stop the federal agencies from just pulling all the research funding from the school. They could just say it's because of a different reason. Now it could have been much worse, because if he was not tenured, he would have easily been silenced or dismissed by Virginia Tech in order to keep all of the research funding. And if he was silenced, we would have never known about the severity of the Flint, Michigan water crisis, which he spearheaded. Now, in the past, professors could be fired for the most inappropriate reasons. In fact, tenure started because women were being fired for the most random reasons. They were being fired for just being women, and according to the AFT, or the American Federation of Teachers, during the Great Depression, jobs were so scarce that the moment female teachers were married, they were fired on the spot. Now, this is a very messed up case, but it could still happen. I'm talking about the false accusations of students. Professors could be baited and accused of sexual harassment by their students. And we all know that lawyers and lawsuits are very expensive. And without tenure, these professors could be easily dismissed to avoid such an expensive lawsuit or even the bad negativity. Now, an example of this would be Pamela Smock, who was a professor at University of Michigan. After class, she was talking to a female student about possible plagiarisms. However, after class, that same female student accused her of sexual harassment. Now, because she wasn't tenured, her salary was frozen, and it stayed frozen even after those allegations were dropped, and she has since returned to work. Now, tenure also leads to higher qualities of education. Without the fear and anxiety of losing their job, professors can focus their efforts into providing better education. We can think of tenure kind of like marriage and dating. If you knew you weren't a permanent thing, you wouldn't be likely to really give any effort, kind of like dating. However, if you knew that you were in it for the long run, you're more inclined to really give it your all, like marriage and tenure. I'll take your question.
So since you're making the analogy to marriage, you know that when you start dating someone, it's amazing, and then when you get married and there's a honeymoon phase and you're giving it your all and you're 100% in it, and then after you've been married for a while, after you've reached the marriage and done that for a time, you get tired, you get complacent. Isn't that the same thing with teachers after tenure?
The analogy for marriage and tenure, the way I thought of it, was more like when you've come through a problem to your marriage, you don't just quit on the spot. You tend to want to work those problems out. And that's where the marriage and the tenure analogy comes in. Now, tenure also lets professors innovate in teaching. I'm pretty sure most of you had part-time jobs where you had a probationary period where if you make one mistake and you're out. You can think of these probationary periods similar to how teachers feel without tenure. You have to constantly walk on eggshells to make sure you can one day achieve tenure. Now, during this probationary period, teachers are more likely to be easier on their students in order to get the results to get them tenure. And when you're barely hanging on to your job, you tend to want to do whatever is normal and stick to the status quo. However, Glenn Platt, a tenured professor, wanted to flip that status quo and by flipping the classroom model, where all forms of learning are done prior to class and in-class time is spent on more active learning. However, many of his faculty members met with resistance because they only have done everything by the status quo and it was safe. However, when you get tenure, professors are more likely to do more risky things. And if we're going to talk about risky, let's talk about a current situation here. We are in a college campus debating the elimination of college tenure. And keep in mind, college tenure is like the holy grail for all college professors. It's their job security. Professors don't want us challenging the job security. And only a madman, or well, a tenured professor like Mr. Steve would even think of bringing this debate up for debate. Now, tenure also helps professors advocate for their students. Without tenure, professors are in no position to help their students. And with tenure, however, they have the leverage to finally fight with administrators for their students' rights. For example, at UC Berkeley, students know this, and they have made alliances with their tenured professors to fight for more student rights. Now, tenure also prohibits the termination due to financial reasons. On average, a full-time faculty member makes $54,000 a year, while an associate faculty member makes much less than that. And it is much cheaper to hire more associate faculty members than it is to maintain a full-time faculty member. And we all know about the budget cuts in education. And with the amount of money that a full-time faculty member earns, the school can use that money to hire much more associate faculty members to do much more of the job. And in fact, what the schools would be doing would be firing experienced professors in exchange for less experienced and less expensive ones. They would be exploiting cheap labor in order to teach students. And what would that say about our teaching quality? I'll take your question.
So do you have any examples of where faculty has been firing tenured teachers and replacing them with adjunct professors?
No, I do not have any examples of that because tenure protects schools from doing that exact same thing. Now, I know that there are many different problems in colleges, but we can't just scapegoat tenure for all of them. There are many different problems that we can point fingers to and say, you're the cause of all our problems. Now, I know that tenure isn't the perfect system, and it was established in a whole different generation, but what other systems are there that are perfect? And we can't just throw the baby out with the bathwater. So I will leave it up to my partner to discuss the possible improvements we can make tenure, we can give to tenure to make it better. Thank you.
Okay, so we got a little media thing. You can go ahead and introduce the next speaker while we're setting up the media display. You guys may want to jot down if you have any notes you want to take on how well those arguments went for you, and then see if the other side can actually respond to those arguments.
Okay. Thank you, Michael, for your arguments. To summarize his point, Michael claims that tenure protects teachers. It also improves education. Furthermore, he also claims that tenure allows professors to advocate for students. And he also explained the cost efficiency of tenure. Before we move on to our next speaker, I want to talk about the voting sheet I forgot to talk about earlier. So before the speech, you can rate from 1 to 10 on how you think about tenure. And after the speech, you will rate it again, and we will tolerate the results afterward. So let's welcome from the opposing side, Juliet Davila.
All right, in case that wasn't clear. So in case I wasn't clear, so hopefully you've already marked your initial impression. If you don't know anything about the subject, you can just put 5. If you already have some kind of an idea, like you're kind of moving in one direction, you can put that. And then at the end of the debate, the way we're going to determine the winner is who moved how many people in which direction. It's not how many people vote in one side, it's who moved somebody in one direction. So wherever you started with, see if you ended up moving to the left or to the right based on that. So with that, let's have Juliet come through. Start right away.
Yes.
And that's why it's virtually impossible for me to get fired, no matter what I do. Hi-ya! Karate.
You can laugh. It's okay. That was a good one. That's pretty much the problem with tenure in an eggshell. Obviously over-exaggerated and dramatized, but that's pretty much the idea, that tenure protects teachers even if they aren't the best teachers. So to begin, I just want to introduce myself. My name is Juliet, and I'd just like to again thank all of my colleagues or whoever in the honors program, Mr. Steve and Yolanda and everyone for being here. Today I will be representing the opposition in favor to eliminate tenure and replace it with a contract-based employment, which Ellie later will continue to explain. But for now, I just want to address some of the things that the affirmative has stated. To begin, the opposition stated that tenure protects teachers from arbitrary firing. Well, so do a lot of other things. So what's the need for tenure? For example, unions, labor unions, which were established before tenure and which led to the creation of tenure, are still alive and well today, and in fact, even better today. So there's the Civil Rights Act, Age Discrimination Acts, Equal Pay Acts, collective bargaining, state and federal labor unions. All of these things stacked on top of each other protect everyone who are working in the United States So what's so special about professors or teachers that need an additional guaranteed protections when everyone else is protected by the same thing? And also, in California specifically, there's the California Faculty Association, or the CFA, which is collective bargaining for teachers, which is an additional coverage. And then also there's the CCA, which is the Community College Association. So with all of these protections, unions, and acts established to protect employees and teachers, tenure is not needed anymore. To continue, tenure, the affirmative stated that tenure leads to a higher quality of education. In response, I'd like to say that tenure leads to a lower quality of education for college students. Think about this. We are all here going to school and living in the Silicon Valley, right? And we all have different majors, mostly tech, a lot of nursing. And let's say a tenured teacher is at Mission, has been tenured for a while. That teacher is teaching a super outdated class, let's say medieval literature. But because he's tenured, the administration and the school still has to continue to give him class time or give him things to do, and it's a waste of money and takes away from new professors or new teachers that want to come in but can't because all of the spots are filled with tenured faculty. To continue, tenure makes it really hard for colleges to adapt to new trends in student learning. We all want to quality and up-to-date teachings and learn about all the new things that are happening, especially now with the way that the world is going. There's no need, there won't be any need. Yes, Michael, I'll take your question.
Are you aware that tenured professors have the responsibility to keep up to date to their academic?
Yes, I am aware that teachers are needed for that. However, even though they are required, most of those requirements are ineffective because there's no one technically checking up on them to go and stay updated. And even if they are evaluations for teachers to continue to get updated on new learning styles or new subjects, no one in the faculty who is also tenured is going to really go against another tenured professor, because it's like, you know, a happy wife is a happy life. Like, you don't want to bother the person that you're going to be working with for the rest of your life, pretty much. And also, the affirmative also stated that tenure helps professors advocate for their students. And I quote, Michael stated that teachers without tenure are in no position to help their students, which couldn't be farther from the truth. There are many non-tenure teachers here at Mission College who love and value what they do, and they advocate for their students. They encourage them to sign up for programs and encourage them to, if something's not working, they'll do their best in all of their ability and capability to help them. So it's absurd for the affirmative to state that non-tenure teachers are in no position to help their students. With or without tenure, colleges professors can help their students. Maybe not in as broad ways because they're scared to step on eggshells, as Michael has stated, but they still go above and out of their way with or without tenure. And also, I'd like to state that on our side, we are arguing that colleges and universities are fully justified in moving away from tenure and moving away from tenure and relying more on cheaper and less privileged part-time faculty. Less privileged in that we're saying means that they're not as privileged as tenured professors who get guaranteed benefits. So that's something that adds on and on every year that a tenured teacher keeps on continuing. They get health benefits and guaranteed all this other stuff, while adjunct faculty who work just as hard don't get as benefits, and they have to worry about if they're going to continue to be contracted. Yes, I'll take your question.
So if we're going to have more part-time, sounds like, faculty, non-contract without benefits, how do you expect to encourage all these great teachers you're anticipating from taking a job that already pays a much lower salary than the private sector?
Thank you for your question. That was a good question. So when we eliminate tenure altogether, everyone is going to be in the same boat. And if you want to be a teacher and you want to strive to teach your students and continue to learn or to continue to do what you love, there's going to be competition for teaching at a college with or without tenure, because it's a job and it's something that people are passionate about. Yes, Michael, I will take your question.
Isn't tenure what makes people want to become professors? If we lose tenure, wouldn't that just automatically just make people not want to become professors anymore?
Well, for example, I know Mr. Steve is very passionate about what he does, and he's given a lot and invested into a lot of us in my argumentation and debate class, and also into an honor student. He does what he does because he loves what he does. So I think you're alluding to that no one will be teachers if there's no guaranteed tenure. So I feel like teachers are always going to be needed. Higher education is something that all of us want. That's why we're all here, and it's going to continue to be that way for a long time. So yes, teachers will continue to be teachers. Professors will continue to be professors with or without tenure, yes.
I promise last. So you're talking about Mr. Steve's commitment to teaching. Doesn't he have tenure? And don't you think that tenure was a good motivation for him to want to go into this position?
Yes, but I also know that, well, I speak on Mr. Steve's very good half, that I feel if tenure wasn't even a thing, he would still be just as passionate and just as committed to his students and what he does. Sorry, we're putting him on the spot. But that's saying that people are only in it for the guaranteed lifetime employment, or only in it because it guarantees a certain amount of money. Yes, that's awesome, and that does benefit. But there's always been a need for teachers, and there's always going to continue to be a need for teachers. And adjunct faculty can get benefits and recurring benefits after without tenure, as long it's a contract is between the administration, the college, and the professor. So it's something that can be debated about or talked about when in having a contract. So in conclusion, the end of tenure is an outdated system that is no longer needed. We have so many labor unions and protections. Professors or adjunct faculty do just as much as tenured faculty do, so why not even the playing field? And letting go of the old and embracing reality is really what's going to benefit us as students and as colleges universities all around the country. So now I will hand it off to my partner, Allie, to talk more about these contract-based employments that I've been talking about. Thank you.
Okay, since I was insinuated into this debate, I should note, you'll never know whether I would just do this for the love of the martyrdom of teaching or not, because I'm not going to bias the debate. There was one thing, though, that I failed to clarify in the beginning, and what is the difference between a tenured contract and a contract? Because tenure is a contract. So the difference is tenure is supposedly the more permanent, theoretically lifetime, but it's not guaranteed, but it's a permanent, ongoing, continuous contract. You don't have to renew it all the time. The ones they're talking about, term contracts, are periodic. You have to renew them, and you can negotiate them in any way you want. And the question was brought to me, which I hadn't thought of before, is that some of these contracts can be negotiated directly with the college. I could just go in and negotiate directly with them, be hired at will and fired at will, or I could come in through the union as a part-time worker and get all the union protections. So because that was just brought to me, this is a good moment for a little fact check. So I'm going to have Anne-Marie Wasserbauer, if I get that somewhat close, who, why don't you announce your title so I don't butcher that as well. But she is the one who has the grand knowledge, who's going to lead us in the Q&A, but she's going to clarify something right now before Ellie.
Hi everyone, I'm very pleased to be here. My name is Anne-Marie Wasserbauer. I've been a teacher for over 30 years and at West Valley Mission Community College District for 25. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Just to mention what your esteemed professor just said, when you have a collective bargaining unit, which is a union, all the members of that particular group, teachers, librarians, and counselors in our case, vote to be part of a union. There's just one union for the teachers and one union
bargains with the district. And so you couldn't have, maybe only where you didn't have a union, that's where you could have those, every single teacher goes and gets their own contract with, like in a charter school where you don't have a union. Some charter schools, most of them don't have unions. So they could be fired at will and they don't have to tell you why. So I'll just stop there because I know you're going to continue and I really am excited to hear all the arguments going back and forth. Thank you.
And we're looking forward to getting more clarification. This gets really complex, and I'm glad we actually have someone with experience to clarify all this. So I'm assuming you guys are referring more to the contracts that would be more like our part-time contracts that still work within the union? Okay, so that's our point of clarification. Okay, so let's bring up Ellie to continue the opposition, and then we'll finish up with the last affirmative.
Hello everyone, thank you again for being here. My name is Ellie and I'm on the opposition side of eliminating tenure. So right now I'm going to talk about why temporary contract is a better replacement for tenure. So firstly, temporary contracts only last for a certain number of years, but it can be renewed. So good professors, if you're a really good professor, you can just work your way up, like continuously renew it year after year, and that will continue and bring you a lifetime job, which is similar to tenure. And plus, since your contract can be renewed like after a certain amount of years, you can negotiate for, let's say, better pay job or better benefits for you guys. Additionally, college are still in control of maintaining the quality of the professors. So firstly, if the professor is not good enough, if the professor is not keeping up with the new information, and the teachers and the students doesn't want that professor anymore, they can just not renew the contracts, so they don't have to really fire professors. They can just not renew. And that can be cheaper as well, because firing sometimes can result in lawsuit and things, and it's really costly. So after probationary periods, they will also get more security. So firstly, the school will decide on how long the next contract is and like how much the teacher is worth based on their previous performance. So they can only be fired with just good cause, so they can just not be some silly cause like you're not wearing a uniform with no dress code at all at the college. And school will definitely know that the lack of tenure will kind of make professors fear of that job security. And since they all knows that and everyone's the same, there's no tenure anymore, they're gonna try to provide more benefits and allow more academic freedom for professors to attract and keep good professors at their schools. So you can witness this change at new young universities all over the countries. So according to Chemistry and Engineering News, a weekly magazine published by American Chemistry Society, there's a university called Florida Polytechnic University, which was founded in 2012, so not so old, it's really young. And just quick note that this is actually a public university, and Florida has to get rid of tenure for new professors starting in 2011. So according to the president of the school, Randy Evans, he said that the contract creates more insecurity than it fixed. So they already knows that having no tenures put them on like the weak side of job security. So that's why they create their own academic bills of rights, stating what are protected for academic freedom for the teachers, what others cannot do to prevent that academic freedoms. And they also have a really strong academic freedom statement, which they work on every year to make it stronger and stronger. They actually challenge the professors to make it stronger. Another example is that the Harvard University of Science and Technology. Oh, I will take yours, sorry.
Thank you. I remember what I was about to say. So you talk about their academic freedom clause. Is there anything to actually assure that it'll be enforced?
Yes, so actually if you go, you can just go to Google actually, and you search for Florida Polytechnic University Academic Freedom, they will like have a whole page about what they have, the rules for the teachers. And there's actually like a PDF of 2 full page stating just about academic freedom. And there's an additional file stating, hey, you have to protect this, you cannot do this and that to prevent the academic freedom. So that's clear to everyone, not just professors. Okay, so I'm gonna continue with another example. So Harvard University of Science and Technology, which was founded in 2001, so a little bit older, but still considered young. So it's a private university, and it's also started with no tenure. So it's similar with what I'm talking about because they also have contract system, and that can be renewed, and they are different from teachers to teachers. So some are on 1-year contracts, some are on multi-year contract, just depending on their performance and like the need of the university. One special thing about them is that they give full voting rights for adjunct faculties after having complete 27 hours of credit hours. So here, I'm going to note with you that according to American Association of University Professors report in 2012, right now, they say that right now adjunct faculties accounts for 70% of the academic workforce. So that's a huge amount. But they are often excluded from department meetings, from discussions on curriculums and governance activities. And that 70% also teach and interact with students as well. And this is also a problem about the privilege of that 30%. So why can they have the voting rights for the 70%? They can have a whole group agree to something, but they can just say it in a department meeting, for example. The AAUP also noted in that report that they should have a full vote. So that is really important. And actually, in 2015, adjuncts at Webster University, is actually a private university, they filed a vote with National Labor Relations Board, which is a federal agency that protects employees' right to organize to help a union vote for themselves. So you can see that teachers, without the writing votes, they also want to make their opinions and ideas matter and also want to represent the students. But they just cannot because their votes doesn't mean as much, or they just have no say compared to the 30%. So that's why we should replace the tenure with a temporary contract system. And this is also like the flipped classroom that Michael mentioned earlier. You can just, this is a new innovative idea. No one has tried it out. It sounds really crazy. Just like exactly the same case as the flipped classroom and the traditional method. Like right now, everyone's not like it. And so if you bring in a new thing, it might work, but you don't know it. Yes, I'll take your questions.
Last question. So you say, this is something new and novel, let's try it. Is that really reason to put thousands of people's jobs in jeopardy just to try a new experiment?
What do you mean by jeopardy? What do you mean by jeopardy?
If you want to eliminate tenure and replace it with this new system, and let's just see if it works.
Well, it's not just like, hey, just let's see how it works. So there's already states. So I just say that Florida already did that. And the school is still doing well until now. So Florida, I was restated again. So like effective July 1st, 2011, Florida has eliminated tenure for all new coming professors. So they're still doing well. Everything is still good. So they're doing it. Why don't we just try? It's not just like, hey, let's do this. There's already someone's tried it. They're still doing well, so why don't give it a chance?
Okay, just to point one thing out, just to get a clarification, just as a point of interest to bring up the affirmative side. You had mentioned Florida. The Florida Institute of Technology has functioned for 60 years without tenure, and they're adopting it as of, is it this year? I think it's this year. So this is an interesting thing for you guys to debate because they're both happening in Florida, which always seems to be some kind of a weird, like, controversial ground for everything, hanging chads or whatever. All right, so we're going to bring up our final affirmative speaker. The reason the affirmative went first and last is because they really have the burden of proof, and that's why the negative spoke twice in the middle. So it's like a trial, you know, where the prosecution goes first and last. Okay, so this is the last word for the affirmative side in favor of tenure, and then we're going to open it up to you guys for questions. So let's bring up Cynthia Mock for the final speech.
Before Cynthia turns, I want to summarize the opposing side arguments. So Juliet claims that academic protection is no longer needed, as well as tenure lowers the teaching qualities. And as for Ellie, she stated that she gave us a definition about the contract-based employment and how it would be a good fit to replace tenure. Okay, so let's welcome Cynthia Ma for the affirmative side.
Hi, my name is Cynthia. I'm just going to grab the baton from my partner Michael here and ask, does anybody here honestly believe we could even discuss abolishing tenure in a public forum such as this one if the professor in charge of these shenanigans did not have it? Truth is, I've heard minor stories that I think he may have ruffled some feathers in having us bring up this debate. But obviously, I think that is a clear show that we do need to have this discussion. So tenure is absolutely necessary to protect professors' freedom and protect them from being fired unfairly. The opposition is not alone, however, having some apprehension about tenure and the system in which it is applied. I would like to take this opportunity to just reiterate the necessity of tenure in academia, discuss how the opposition's limited term contracts cannot serve professors or students well, and then I'll explain a proposal I have to keep tenure but update it to address the concerns that the opposition and possibly some of you may have. So the opposition would like us to believe that tenure is obsolete. And one of the complaints I hear often is that tenure prevents colleges and universities from adhering to the same proven hiring and firing practices used in businesses in the real world. And I think that's something we need to keep in mind here. Academia is not the real world. Sorry to say, but I've came across in my research many stories. Professors without tenure who were fired for having an unpopular opinion, for challenging a student to do better, to use their critical thinking, but the student felt offended or too challenged by an opposing viewpoint, and the professor was fired for it. Where were these laws and labor unions that were supposed to protect these professors from being fired arbitrarily? And as far as that goes, where's the due process that you find in real business if someone is to be fired? They don't get fired for saying something unpopular once. There's a process of if there's a problem, the business will work with the employee to try to correct the problem, and only if the problem can't be corrected will a professor be fired. Yes, Juliet.
Hi. So you're stating that tenured professors do get fired, but how many tenured professors have been getting fired? That supports like what you're saying. Like how many teachers have actually been fired, or even the evaluation or evaluation to be evaluated, like the thought of a teacher being evaluated.
In my brief, obviously we haven't been working on this very long, my brief research, I found at least half a dozen high-profile professors from within the past 2 years who were fired for something similar. Like one made an unpopular comment in class, when the university didn't like that she was interviewed on Fox News. And these were all cases that were not fireable offenses, but the professors without tenure lost their position and possibly their careers because of it. The opposition would also like you to believe that tenured teachers become complacent. Let's just use the word they're thinking. They think teachers with tenure become lazy. And that could not be further from the truth. Start with, as my partner told you, tenure, and actually Mr. Steve, tenure is not given, it's earned. It takes years of proven commitment and proven standards of high levels of teaching and, in some cases, research to gain tenure. In fact, studies show that some of the best teachers are professors who have had tenure for a long time. It's because they still meet the high standards that gave them tenure in the first place, and now they have the experience and the job security to continue to develop their teaching skills. The opposition would like you to think their short-term contract system motivates teachers to perform better. But again, the studies show that's not necessarily true. And in fact, these short-term contracts promote instability and mediocrity. How is a professor going to develop if he or she is constantly moving from one college to another in search of a better contract, in search of a better deal? Yes, Julia.
Do you know which studies have shown that tenured professors support?
I'm sorry, I do not have that link with me now, but it's in our Google Docs if you want to look it up. As a tenure, the contract systems promote mediocrity because it can't protect professors from being fired or from just not having their contract extended. Professors are forced to keep their opinions to themselves, to not challenge student ideals, to not get on the bad side of an administrator or department chair who might find some excuse to not renew that contract, and it limits teachers' ability to teach. The contracts, they sound good in theory, but they don't work. They promote mediocre teaching practices. They can't protect teachers from being fired unfairly. And as Audrey Williams, June, stated in the Chronicle of Higher Education, tenure is the essential protection faculty members need to do their jobs. Now, that said, I understand there are still some concerns, some valid concerns about the tenure system. So let's talk about what we can do about it. I propose, instead of throwing out the tenure system, we modify it. Most of what's in there still works, but let's make changes to address these concerns that what if there's a bad teacher? It's honestly extremely rare, but if it is possible, I say, let's amend the tenure contract. And I need a slide now. Thank you. Yeah. So tenure, it is a contract. It's a lifelong contract between a university and a professor, but it is still a contract. As such, both sides need to adhere to their side of the bargain. So the college or university guarantees the professor job security and academic freedom. In return, the professor promises to adhere to continued professional development. That is, the professor must stay up to date in his or her field of research and in the field of education. And this may include attending seminars, conferences, doing new research, a variety of things, but the professor has to show that he or she is staying up to date. Yes, Ellie?
So about the research part. So actually right now with the tenure, before getting tenure, they're also pressured to do research. And another research, Chronicle of Higher Education, they show that there are a lot of unuseful research on like unnecessary and static topics that cannot be used. So you saying that we're going to increase those researches as the requirements for tenure?
So these requirements, actually, tenured professors are already expected to do these things. What I'm suggesting is we formalize it, because as you stated, it's not always enforced as well as it should be. So I'm saying, let's make it so professors are evaluated regularly, show that they are staying up to date in their field, and they will be given periodic, regular teaching evaluations from peer evaluators to determine if they are maintaining the same high level, high standards of teaching that got them tenure in the first place. And like in real world business, we'll actually bring it into academia now. Since this is a contract, if professors are found to not be holding up their end of the deal, if they're not staying current, if they are getting lackadaisical in their teaching, the university can begin proceedings to revoke tenure. Slide 2. So, but again, like in business, it can't be because someone said something unpopular. It can't be one person making a decision. There will be a process. The professor, if he or she is lacking, will be given the opportunity to improve again and try to regain these standards. And as is true currently with tenure system, gross misconduct would always be sufficient reason to revoke tenure and terminate a professor. And by misconduct, I mean if a professor is caught, say, embezzling from the department, of course we're not going to let that tenure continue to protect that professor. But likewise, saying something unpopular or something that someone may find offensive, especially if misconstrued, does not constitute gross misconduct. And any real problems, it has to be proven. Unsubstantiated rumors are not reason for dismissal. And likewise, making a mistake once is not sufficient reason for dismissal. So, in conclusion, the contract-based systems that the opposition presented, they sound good in theory, but they really won't work. Tenure does. So is our current tenure system perfect? Of course not. That's why I suggest we amend it. As my partner said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. The basic foundation of tenure is solid. It works. It protects teachers. It allows teachers to do their jobs, and it allows them to do their jobs well. So the tenure system, it's not only what's best for teachers, it is what's best for students. Thank you.
All right, so at this point, we're going to have you guys jot down, just from the debate alone, before we get into Q&A, because we might get extra bias in there. How would you vote now after hearing the debate, as opposed to how you voted in the very beginning? Were you moved in one direction or another, and if so, by how much? So on the second line, just indicate, did you kind of push over to the right, or did you push over to the left? While you're doing that, just a little clarification, because I don't know if it came across as clearly in there. The alternative that they're presenting on the affirmative is reform. In other words, not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So the idea is not getting rid of tenure, but reforming it. And a couple of things that were mentioned, just to clarify, we already have post-tenure review, peer evaluations. Those already exist. But the argument is that they're not strong enough and that they don't actually work. And so the real argument is to strengthen those to make them work. So that's kind of what they were saying. I had to clarify that because you might have been a little confused. And gross misconduct is already illegal anyway, so that doesn't strengthen anything. That's part of the tenure contract. You can be fired for moral malfeasance, gross misconduct, gross incompetency. Those are things already built into tenure. That's why it's not a guarantee for life. So that's a little clarification for you. All right, so why don't we go ahead and open this up for any questions. Do you want to, we don't have an extra mic, so you'll have to either speak up. And you can address your comment, could be a comment or a question, to either side or to both. And the rule is that if you address it to one side, both sides can respond. So if you all drill on one side, the other side still gets to respond. All right, so why don't we go ahead. If you have any questions or comments to start the discussion. Go ahead. You just stand up and make your point. Let's try to speak up a little bit.
There was an argument made that job security, there was an argument made that teachers don't don't just get into teaching for the tenure or for the job security. But job security is a very big deal for most employees. Why would it be different for teachers?
Many other professions out there have their own form of job security. For example, if you were an accountant, you would eventually hit a point where you have a partnership with a big firm, like PwC, for example. And if you're in the Supreme Court, when you become a court justice, you're in it for life. To a point, that's kind of like tenure. Schools aren't the only ones with like a form of permanent residency. A lot of different careers have systems like that.
I'd like to add to that. So again, like federal judges are appointed for life, that's so they can perform their job without fear of being pressured from other sources to go against their better judgment. And the same is true for teachers. They need that same kind of protection just to prevent the public, students, administrators from trying to force them to keep quiet about their opinions, for not expecting students to voice their own opinions and defend them. And yeah, I said, other jobs, everyone's concerned with job security, just academia doesn't seem to follow the same rules yet. That's what we're hoping to fix.
And thank you for your question, Hassan. I appreciate it. Really quick, just to answer, because I think it was more, I stated that. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, because I think you guys teachers do it because of that reason, to get the job, to get the tenure, at which point
they're just done. Yeah.
How is that different?
Well, so for what we're saying is that contracts guarantee that job security for a certain amount of time. Contracts could be yearly, 3 years, 5 years, tenure, depending on the school and the teacher that's arguing for the contract. So you can have some form of job security, and then if you really want to continue and like the college and like what you're doing, you'll work harder as a non-tenured teacher to continue to keep your job security and keep your tenure. Thank you.
We have a question over here.
I like how she said to keep their tenure.
Oops.
Thank you. I want to clarify something. Can you both sides define tenure? What is tenure?
According to the AAUP, from what I've read, the principal purpose of tenure is to safeguard their academic freedom.
No, I mean, what is tenure?
Okay, so my understanding, tenure is essentially lifelong contract between the school and the teacher. It's not guaranteed. As we say, there are situations where tenure can be revoked even without my proposal to strengthen those restrictions. But it allows teachers to have a certain amount of academic freedom to voice their opinions without fear of repercussions.
And how can they be fired? Can they be fired?
Good question.
They can be fired for just cause.
Exactly.
Exactly.
So I want to flip the question. So tenure means due process. You can be fired, but there has to be a process to do so. And just cause means has to be a good reason. Right now in business, the opposition said that there are those protections. Could you please elucidate which protections there are? Is there due process in business and the regular private sector?
So firstly, it's actually, we believe that unions' core mission is to protect the job of the employees.
I'm talking about without a union.
Why without a union? We're saying about system with union.
No. So that's a key point, right? If you don't have a union, you don't have a contract for all the teachers. If you're assuming that unions are going to help, then that's a different argument. They have a contract, they have tenure, or they'll negotiate tenure. That means they'll negotiate how somebody can be fired. What is the procedure by which someone can be fired? In public sector, in the private sector, when you're when you get a job, somebody said something about when you get a job, they have to give you a reason for firing you. My brother, PhD in material science and electrical engineering, was just fired and not given a reason. He was there for 5 years. He was he was in charge of a major department. They closed his department. Did they tell him? Did they have to tell him? No. That's the law. They don't have to tell him. We have laws for sexual discrimination, gender, race, and national origin, right? But the burden of proof is on the person who got fired. So if they were saying, oh, you're a white guy, we're firing you because you're a white guy, and he could prove that, he'd have to prove it. He'd have to fund the lawyer to do so, right? He'd have to do that. So tenure does the opposite. Tenure makes the employer think through exactly why they are firing and prove that and do it in a documented fashion.
Thank you. That's really good clarification. So the extra layer of protection of tenure speaks to your issue of the necessity. You said we already have protections. And so that extra layer is that difference, apparently. That's the one where it reverses the burden of proof and puts it on the one who's firing you. Whereas without those protections and just the normal state and legal and whatever the other ones are without the union, it's your burden of proof to show that they discriminated against you. So that's just a distinction you might want to think about as you think about tenure versus non-tenure. I have kind of a question here. Couldn't you have a union without tenure?
Yes.
Okay. So on your side, why do you need tenure if you already have the union?
My belief, based on what my research, the unions don't, or at least not always, do enough to protect teachers who don't have tenure. I believe teachers need that extra layer of protection.
And I remember the opposition saying that the union was established before tenure. Am I correct? So I remember I brought up a case where tenure was brought up because women were being fired for most random reasons. If the union was created first and women were still being fired, then I believe that tenure was created for that reason. They needed that extra protection. And then they needed the extra protection that union didn't supply them.
Okay, so for the negative side, wouldn't that be the whole reason? You mentioned like you're going to try something new without tenure, but didn't teachers originally not have tenure? So it's already been tried, and that's why we have it now?
So yes, and sorry, can I ask you to clarify, Mr. Steve?
Originally, teachers didn't have tenure,
Mm-hmm.
so we have tried this. And then there were all kinds of cases where people were fired, women were fired for getting pregnant or married, blacks were fired because they were black, Jewish socialists who joined unions were fired. You can go on and on and on. People who didn't vote for a politician were not rehired. It goes on and on and on. So that
Yes.
isn't that why they have tenure?
Well, yeah, so that was then, and then this is now, and with the way times are going, things like that don't happen anymore. That gets taken high up, that gets taken to Supreme Court. Or it does happen, but like, yes, well, it's different now than then.
Okay. I have I can give you a personal example. I worked at a private for-profit college where I didn't have tenure. Actually, no one had tenure. And I got fired for, this was the reason that I got fired from that job. Well, laid off or whatever. I failed students. No, seriously. And the reason, their case was these students are paying a lot of money to go to this private school, and you can't fail them.
Too rich to fail?
Well, imagine what that does to academic integrity. I would never hire somebody who has a degree from that place, right? But, I mean, that was their reason. It didn't have any, that's not a discrimination thing.
But like, I have a quick question. So like, do they really have like documentations of you failing the students, or they just say it and then let you go?
No, I mean, there's some records are there. They know I was failing students. But I mean, their policy was, we don't fail anybody because they paid for this.
So do you guys in the audience, do you worry that this might water down your degrees, create grade inflation, teachers who pander to you because they want to get good ratings, because they're afraid because they don't have tenure, that they might not be rehired? Does anybody ever have this concern? And if so, would you like to comment on it or address it? Or would you rather have it that way? Well, right now, the average grade, does anyone know the average grade at Stanford University when you take all grades into consideration of all people at Stanford? It's an A-. So you're average if you're an A-.
Is that surprising, though? The bigger school, the Stanford, the Ivy Leagues, they're only accepting the absolute top, like the honor students. Shouldn't they be performing better, like tenured professors?
Can 95% of all people be above average? Did you take statistics? That would be an anomaly that is unexplainable.
Yeah, I just want to add that, there can be, really good students, but you have to have some way to, distinguish them, extremely talented and a genius, right? You can just not have, okay, this guy is good, that one's good too, hey, that one's good too, and you're going to hire every one of them?
To add on to her point, I think most classes have the bell curve, where you need to be in the top 10% of the class to get an A, and everyone else just get a B, and everyone gets a grade below that.
I'm trying to get some other folks, some other voices in here. I would love to see a little more participation, especially from students. I'm curious what you guys are thinking as students, and maybe this is brand new to you.
So it's human nature to get comfortable when you have a form of protection, whether that's in school or even in a part-time job. And there's always going to be bad people making bad choices everywhere. So what would differentiate if there was the tenure? What would differentiate between bad and good? For example, you said that professors are more freely to express their opinion. But what if that opinion is severe and it's like a racial slur directed towards a specific student? How do you differentiate without it coming down to my word versus your word?
I say something specific like that, like say actual racial slur directed at a student, that would fall into the category, I think, of gross misconduct. There will always, in any case, be a question of one person's word against another, but like in say illegal, if an actual crime is committed, if there's any evidence, if there's any witness, then certainly that would be taken into consideration, and a professor would, even under the current tenure, could lose his position for something like that.
But in the case that if there's no proof, it was in a room with just the student and the professor, wouldn't people be more likely to take the side of the professor since they have tenure? I say this because it's happened to me.
Excellent question, and honestly, I don't know that I have an answer for that. I would like to say that one person's word against another, I personally wouldn't want to make a decision and say, well, I think you're right, therefore I'm going to cost you your job. Or I think the professor's right, therefore I'm going to think poorly of the student. I would hope both would have reasonable reputations, and I would have to give them both benefit of doubt until one of them could prove right or wrong.
But couldn't tenure kind of put the college and the administration on the side of the teacher against students, because the students are going to come and go. That person's going to be gone very shortly. If they go against the teacher, they got a long, costly lawsuit on their hand with bad PR. They got to deal with that colleague for a lifetime, and if they fail, that's going to be a problem. So wouldn't it just be better to avoid all that and just kind of dismiss the student?
Yeah, and can I just quickly add? So according to a 2009 study, it stated that even though this is in high school, but this kind of showed a trend, that 99% of all administrators' evaluation for professors are satisfactory. And can you believe that this 99%?
It's like Stanford.
Well, certainly the tenured professors are going to have good evaluations. They're good teachers. That's how they got tenured in the first place.
Actually, that's all teachers, not just tenured teachers. I researched that too.
Nice.
I'm glad you do your research.
And Marie's got a comment or
I
question.
wanted to give you some examples since I've been here a long time. Faculty like me, you know, who wanted to get tenure, had to work 4 years for it and had multiple evaluations, and then we continue to get evaluations. But as union president, I know of last year there were 2 tenure track faculty who did not, after 3 years, get their tenure. They were dismissed. And as department chair, I know that I have talked with part-time faculty after evaluating them and saying, basically, we're not going to hire you again. There are cases where, say in 25 years, there was one case of embezzlement, and that person was also let go. So if it's a crime, of course, that's the gross misconduct that you're talking about. These things do happen. I think when you're talking about evaluations, they are done fairly frequently, but teachers are also aware of those people who kind of fall through the cracks, and they want to make sure that the performance of everyone is good, so that everyone is not looking at the bad teacher and saying everybody's bad. So we have strengthened our contract to make the performance appraisals more rigorous. That means there's going to be 3 people on every evaluation team, and one of them is going to be an administrator from now on. This is something that is maybe more for the pro, right? You said reform. So this would be one of those ideas. And so I just want to give you some real life examples.
Yeah, just to add to that, one thing you should realize about tenure, it's a long road to tenure. Okay, I worked for more than 10 years as a part-timer. How long were you doing? How long, Steve? How?
Freeway flyer for 10 years, and then you have to add on all the undergraduate work and then all the graduate work.
So, you know, work for 10 years part-time. Lots of people get weeded out during that process. I mean, you have to hang in there for 10 years, get good evaluations, not, right? Then you get a tenure track job, and you got to work for 4 years. And I've been on tenure committees. That process of evaluation, you're observed constantly. It's a really rigorous process. You got to get through all of that, and then you get tenure. So, why do people get good evaluations when they're tenured faculty? Well, and also, why is the average high in the first place? Well, if somebody's a bad apple, they're just gone, right? So. Of course it would curve higher.
I would like to ask the affirmative to address the point brought by opposition. How does, they stated that tenure prevents the college to adapt to new fields of study, to change their classes to what's demanded with the change of time. Right? That was the case with medieval literature you mentioned.
Oh, can you further clarify? Sorry.
So the opposition stated that because of tenure, there might be classes that are no longer needed, but the teachers need to be hired, so the curriculum wouldn't adapt, right?
I believe there is a program, I think I forgot the professor who told me about this, but there is a program or a policy where if your field of study is outdated, then then your chances of being or let go as a professor is, you can be let go as a professor if your field of study is obsolete at that point.
I can fact check that one for you. It's one thing that's not protected if you have tenure is they can eliminate your entire program and and then you're gone.
First, they have to give you a chance to retrain.
Yeah, that happened though to, was it?
Photography, journalism.
I believe there was real estate here.
Wrestling,
floral
registry.
Anyways, there's been a lot of departments that, since I've been here, that they got rid of the department faculty. You are gone. They get rid of your department.
Especially if you're part-time.
Yeah. So yes, if the whole department, if is closed, if there's not enough students taking, say, that real estate class to keep real estate classes going, that tenured real estate faculty member will be let go. I think the question, though, is there a problem where, say, your medieval literature professor has not a lot to teach, but there's enough going on to keep that professor hired. If they're only teaching one class, then now there's a reason to keep them. What can we do then to help fill their schedule if they're required to teach a certain number of units and there's not a lot that they can do? They can't teach other subjects, say.
Well, first I want to take issue with the medieval literature being so unimportant, but you know, I think. Yeah, philosophy. I mean, if you want to go entirely by free market, you know, supply and demand, you're going to end up with a market. You're going to end up with College Inc., you know, Incorporated, and we're moving into that assembly line model, this corporate model already, which I think is really dangerous, because a lot of these things like philosophy, you know, people, oh, why do you need that? How's it going to help put food on my table or get me a job or whatever? And it kind of defeats the purpose of education. So I think you need tenure to protect some of these sort of sacred areas of thought that you're not going to get with simplistic arguments about does it immediately apply to a STEM major that can get me an immediate job upon graduation. I mean, that's not really the purpose of the academy. I mean, we're not a vocational school. Okay, so, oh, hang on one second. One last thing. So the question I had about the incentive to become a teacher, do you think we're well paid compared to others with equivalent education and training?
No.
Okay.
So actually, I remember that you have to work your way from like getting a like a bachelor degree and then go to a PhD, and then after that you have to become like assistant professors, right? And then you have to do something else before
At
really
a university,
becoming a professor.
yeah.
Even after you get your full professorship, they're getting paid less than someone with comparable education.
Yeah.
So then why would you want to subject us to the same market conditions as other people when we're at an unfair disadvantage, when we get paid less? It seems like we could only offset that with the lure of tenure. At least give us the job security to offset the pay gap.
Here, here.
That's why they pay me the big bucks, you guys.
So I want to ask the opposition. You mentioned about Florida, how they've adopted the non-tenure system since, I believe you said 2011.
Mm-hmm.
And you said they were doing good, but you did not give us like specific statistical numbers about that. Do you have the numbers to prove that they were actually doing good?
I don't remember the exact number, but on the page I found it, which is Chemistry and Engineering magazine. So they actually mention like the new number of students coming in, and they're even saying that the school cannot hire fast enough to supply to that demand from the students. So actually I can just give you the link later on, just between us.
But isn't that the same thing as when McDonald's opened up a job, or Walmart or wherever? They get thousands of people applying for 80 jobs too. It's just the exploitation of the labor force, that there's just too many people out there and not enough jobs. So of course they'll get more people, but those people won't be committed to the institution. They'll get paid less. They'll be more unhappy. It'll come across to the students. So I'm not so sure how you're saying that's really efficient for a teacher to be exploited like that. I'm picking up the pace on you guys because they're drifting here, so we're almost done, you guys.
I also have another question. Since you said that they're going to have contracts, suppose there's another, like we have in like real world private jobs, if somebody's paying me a certain amount and there's another company offering me a job with the higher amount of money, I would definitely go to that one. So aren't we taking education to that level as well? So if a professor is teaching at a certain college and then somebody else is paying them more than that, so they're going to go to the other college. Isn't like not good for the students, because basically the good professor is going where there's more money?
Okay.
Exactly.
That would lower your students' quality of education.
Quality of education gets lowered.
Because if you have a good teacher that'll move to like let's say that contract teacher is a very good teacher, that teacher will move to whatever school is paying them more, and the students will follow. And then that creates no sense of loyalty, and then no sense of like, going to the school will make you do better, because you're just following the teacher everywhere, wherever who's paying more.
But I would just want to add, so the tenured or on tenure track is just 30%. So like you can be taught by this 70%. And that 70% can also be like that. So like if someone else offered them a better paid job, better working condition, they're just gonna leave the school and college and go for another one. So.
Okay, one last question, and then I know people are leaving, and I want to announce the results of the vote. So go ahead.
So I know a few tenured teachers, and I've actually had cases where these tenured teachers, they went off to different schools just because they would have been paid more. I had a vice principal that went to a different school to become a principal, and I have a band director friend who wants to switch schools to a different district because he'd get paid a lot more money. So do you think that honestly it's the contract work, or is it, or not, sorry. Do you think that a contract sort of system would prevent that, or do you think that the revised tenure that you're recommending would prevent teachers just moving around for extra money?
At the very least, I think the contract system would encourage that more. There would be no incentive to stay anywhere. The nice thing about tenure is often a school or district will offer tenure. It may not be transferable, in which case those professors have strong incentive to stay where they can earn tenure and then keep it.
Okay.
I know that it's not every case.
Well, first off, I want to say thank you guys for the ones who stuck it out. I know that was quite a bit. Thank you guys. So this is kind of a little bit of an example. I can see a number of my Comp 20 argumentation debate students here right now. You might want to talk to them. This is kind of a fun thing that we do if you're interested in taking that course. This is what we do in that course. Not in front of a lot of people like this, just in our classes. But as far as the voting is concerned, oh my, just like the prevailing votes that are going on recently, you know, like they're very tight. We're really tight. It was within 1 or 2 votes until we just got one more. But it's very close, but as we had 5 that didn't get changed. Yeah, give me a little drum roll there. For the people who went to the left and said they wanted to keep or moved to the left saying that they wanted to keep tenure, there were 24 votes. For the people who wanted and moved toward the right and said they were more inclined now to abolish tenure, there were 1 vote. So, by the hair of our chinny chin chin. But like our last election, they could claim that they won the popular vote and they won the electoral vote. Okay. So, please feel free to stay after. We actually have a resident expert, so if you want to really know more about the union, how it all works, please stay after. We'll be happy to continue the discussion and hope to see you guys soon. Good luck on your finals.